I was 23 years old on February 14th, 1967, the night I witnessed something that would reshape my understanding of combat, mastery, and human potential. What I'm about to share remained locked in silence for 59 years, protected by an oath sworn to Bruce Lee himself. Only 6 people stood in that Oakland dojo when it happened. 3 are gone now. The other 2 still refuse to speak. But I'm 78 years old, and before I leave this world, you need to know what happened when a judo black belt told Bruce Lee that grappling beats striking. What followed 9 seconds later changed everything. The dojo sat on Broadway Avenue, wedged between a Chinese grocery and a laundromat. The building dated back to the 1920s, all exposed brick and timber beams that creaked when trucks rumbled past outside. Inside, the training floor was old-growth Douglas fir, scarred by decades of throws and falls, stained dark, where countless students' sweat had soaked through the finish. The air carried that particular smell of canvas mats and tiger balm, mixed with the faint metallic scent of the bay coming through cracked windows. 3 overhead lights hung from chains, casting harsh shadows that turned the training space into something like a boxing ring. This was Eddie Tanaka's place, and Eddie ran a traditional judo school the way his sensei had taught him in Kyoto. Every rule followed, every protocol observed, every technique traced back to Jigoro Kano's original teachings with religious reverence. I'd been training under Eddie for 2 years, working toward my brown belt. Judo had given me confidence. I could throw men heavier than my 170 pounds. Eddie encouraged this, speaking often about judo's superiority, how real combat happened in the clinch where judoka controlled everything. On that Tuesday evening, our regular class had just finished when Eddie mentioned Bruce Lee was stopping by. The name meant something different then. This was before the movies, before global fame. In 1967, Bruce Lee was a controversial instructor expelled from the Chinese martial arts community for teaching non-Chinese students. He ran a small school in Oakland's Chinatown, and traditional masters hated him for it. Eddie told us Bruce was interested in cross-training. We waited while Eddie set out tea. Bruce arrived at 8:47. He was smaller than expected, maybe 5'7", 135 pounds. He wore black canvas pants and a white t-shirt. What struck me immediately was how he moved, no wasted motion. He entered with the presence of an apex predator, radiating focused awareness that made you feel like he'd already cataloged every person, every potential variable in the space. Eddie welcomed him with formal courtesy. Bruce returned the bow with something almost playful in his eyes. They shook hands, and when Bruce's hand gripped mine, I felt calluses from hours on wooden dummies. His eyes locked onto mine, and I had the uncomfortable sensation he'd assessed my training level in that single glance. Eddie offered tea. Their conversation started with pleasantries, discussions of training methods. Eddie spoke about judo's history, Kano's genius. Bruce listened with genuine interest, asking technical questions. Then Eddie shifted the tone. He said, almost casually, that grappling had solved the problem of striking, that strikers became helpless once taken to the ground, that traditional kung fu might work in demonstrations but would fail against a judoka who closed distance. Bruce's stillness changed quality. Before, he'd been relaxed. Now he was coiled. He asked Eddie whether a judoka would beat a striker every time. Eddie nodded, elaborating about Gracie challenge matches, how grapplers dominated cross-style competitions. Robert Yamamoto, a newly promoted black belt, spoke up. 6'1", 220 pounds of functional muscle, Eddie's senior student. Robert said confidently that he could take any striker to the ground in 5 seconds, that once he got his hands on them, the fight was over. He looked at Bruce when he said it. Bruce stood smoothly. He asked Robert whether he'd like to test his theory. Robert was already rolling his neck, adjusting his GI. The rest of us back toward the walls. My heart hammered. I'd seen Robert throw police officers, pin heavyweight wrestlers. Against Bruce's slight frame, it seemed a mismatch that would prove Eddie's point. They faced each other. Robert adopted judo stance, knees bent, hands forward, weight balanced. Bruce stood upright, hands at his sides, looking casual except for that bone-deep intensity. Eddie set parameters. They'd start standing. Robert would attempt takedown and control. Bruce could defend however he chose. Eddie said go. What happened next unfolded in 9 seconds that would take minutes to properly describe. Robert exploded forward with trained footwork, hands reaching to secure grips on Bruce's wrists or G-collar that would set up his throwing arsenal. But Bruce wasn't there. He'd shifted minutely, angling off the attack line, creating maybe 4 inches of distance that made Robert's hands close on empty air. The movement was so small you might miss it from across the room, but Robert felt it instantly in his core, that confusion when your target isn't where every instinct said it would be. Robert adjusted immediately, his training kicking in, pursuing the angle with those seeking hands, patient persistence that judo ingrains through thousands of repetitions. Bruce moved again, this subtle rotation of his hips and shoulders that kept him just outside grabbing range while his feet seemed barely to move. Robert's breathing got heavier, sweat appeared on his forehead. His movements got bigger, more committed, as frustration started creeping into his technique. The judoka's fundamental problem was becoming clear. 4 seconds had passed. The man who'd promised 5-second takedowns was discovering that securing grips on someone who understood distance and timing was like trying to grab water flowing between your fingers. Then Bruce did something that made my stomach drop. He stopped retreating. Robert lunged forward with extra commitment, sensing his opportunity, hands grabbing for Bruce's arms with all his 220-pound strength. And Bruce let him close. For a fraction of a second, Robert's weight was committed forward, his body extended in the attack, his center of gravity beyond the point of recovery. In that microscopic window, Bruce's right hand flashed upward in a motion almost too fast to track, traveling maybe 18 inches total. His fist stopped 3/4 of an inch from Robert's throat, just stopped there, frozen in space, perfectly positioned at the soft depression above the collarbone where the carotid arteries pulse beneath vulnerable skin. Robert's eyes went wide, his entire body locked rigid with recognition of what hadn't happened, what could have happened, what had been prevented only by choice. Bruce held his fist there for 2 seconds that felt like an hour, letting Robert feel the position, letting all of us see exactly what could have occurred. Then Bruce lowered his hands slowly, deliberately, and stepped back. His breathing hadn't changed. There was no triumph in his expression, no smirk of superiority. If anything, he looked sad, like he'd been forced to demonstrate something he'd rather have explained with words. Robert stood frozen, hands still extended, face cycling through shock and comprehension. The dojo was silent except for traffic sounds from Broadway. 9 seconds from go signal to frozen fist. Everything Eddie said about grappling, beating, striking had just collided with contradictory reality. Bruce spoke gently, almost apologetically. He said grappling was beautiful, that judo's principles were profound, and its techniques devastating against those who fought within its range and timing. But the best grappling in the world required closing distance first, securing those initial grips, making that critical first contact. And against someone who understood distance and angles, who saw attacks developing before they fully manifested through reading body mechanics and intention, who could place precise strikes at vital targets before grips could be established, the grappling never got the chance to happen. It wasn't that grappling was inferior, Bruce explained. It was that the framework determining when and how grappling occurred was itself a variable under more encompassing principles of combat awareness and timing. Robert bowed deeply, acknowledging genuine defeat and teaching simultaneously. His voice was hoarse, asking how Bruce had seen the opening so clearly. Bruce smiled warmly. He said he'd been watching Robert's shoulders, hips, eyes. The body telegraphs intention before conscious mind recognizes it's decided. Real fighting happened in the space between thought and action, and if you lived in that space through total presence, you could see attacks forming like waves in the ocean before they break on shore. Eddie was silent, staring at the mat. When he looked up, something had changed in his expression. He asked whether Bruce would demonstrate with him. Bruce shook his head gently. He said he had enormous respect for Eddie's skill and teaching, that he hadn't come to challenge anyone. What happened with Robert had been Robert's request. The point was made. Further demonstration would serve only ego, not education. We talked for another hour, sitting in a circle while Bruce explained his philosophy. He talked about water taking its container's shape, about being formless and adaptable, about discovering what worked through honest testing rather than defending what tradition insisted must work. He talked about presence, how most fighters lived either in the previous exchange or the next attack, missing the only moment where action actually occurred. He talked about restraint, how the warrior's ultimate power manifested not in destroying, but in choosing mercy when destruction was fully possible. When Bruce left around 11, he shook each hand with that assessing grip. With Robert, he paused. He told Robert that being defeated by new truth was the first step toward transcending old limitations. That Robert's courage in accepting what happened with honesty and openness revealed more strength than winning 100 tournaments. That real mastery began not when you proved yourself right, but when you accepted being wrong with dignity and curiosity. After Bruce left, Eddie sat alone on the mat for a long time. Eventually, he asked us all to promise we wouldn't speak about what happened, that he needed time to process, to understand what it meant for his teaching. We agreed. We trained together for years after, and none of us ever mentioned it directly, though I think it changed all of us. I'm 78 years old now. My knees are shot from decades of judo falls. My hands ache in cold weather. Eddie passed in 2003. Robert died last year, and I was a pallbearer. In the reception afterward, looking at old photos of him in his judogi, young and powerful and confident, I wanted to tell someone about what happened, about the gift Bruce gave him by showing him larger truth. Bruce himself died in 1973, only 6 years after that night. I attended his funeral in Seattle, stood among thousands he touched, and I kept thinking about that frozen fist at Robert's throat, about the restraint and compassion that gesture embodied. All these years later, I understand that what I witnessed wasn't really about fighting. It was about truth being more important than tradition, about presence being more powerful than speed, about restraint demonstrating greater strength than violence. I'm telling you this now because I'm old enough to know I don't have much time left, and some truths shouldn't die with those who witness them. That night, Bruce showed us something fundamental about mastery, about the courage to question what you've been taught, about the humility to admit when your certainties prove incomplete. Robert's willingness to test his beliefs against reality and his dignity in accepting what that test revealed taught me more about strength than any throw ever could. The dojo building is gone now, replaced by modern offices. But sometimes when I'm in Oakland, I walk past where it stood and I can still smell the canvas and tiger balm, still feel bodies hitting those Douglas fir floors. I can still see Bruce's fist stopping at Robert's throat, still see the compassion in his eyes as he chose restraint over dominance. 9 seconds that contain more teaching than a lifetime of ordinary training. What happened when that judo black belt told Bruce Lee that grappling beats striking wasn't about grappling or striking. It was about the difference between believing you know and actually knowing, between confident certainty and earned wisdom, between defeating opponents and transforming them through demonstration of superior truth. I've carried that lesson for 59 years, and now I'm passing it to you, hoping you'll understand what took me decades to comprehend. The greatest victories don't come from proving yourself right. They come from remaining open to being shown something truer than what you currently believe, and having the courage to change when that truth reveals itself.